Hello, everybody. This is Ed Breniger, and welcome to the Eddie Network podcast. My guest today is a friend, Jane Adshead-Grant, and she is one of the first people that I've ever knew who placed value on listening. So I'm just gonna be quiet and say nothing and listen to her. No, I'm joking. Welcome, Jane. I'm glad you're here. I've been looking forward to this. We've been talking about this for several months. And here we are. And so tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and the value you place on listening. And I think that's really important for us to hear.
Well, thank you, Ed, and I'm thrilled to be here with you and your guests listening in today. So, as you've said, yes, my name is Jane and I'm from the UK. I was born and bred here. I'm living in the southeast of the UK in a county called Essex. We met, of course, through the wonderful work of Dr. Anthony Howard and our passion and interest in human-centered leadership, which is one of my core passions. And listening for me is a core tenet of not only being human, but actually for me is one of the most profound skills that we can develop and master to let other people know that they matter. And I think for me, I have a vision. My vision is that, or rather, I imagine a world where we listen first, enabling others to step up to and who they are meant to be. And you asked me a little bit about why listening or the impact of listening. My experience of listening deeply, listening with intention, is that it's right up there with love. It's a way that we show we love one another. When we make the decision to listen, free of interruption and free of judgment, it shows how much we care.
Yeah.
What do you think? What is listening for you, Ed?
Well, um, well, listening is respect of the other person. It is a discipline that curbs one's ego. Instead of um, waiting to talk, we listen to hear something that is worth responding to or something that triggers a question, which is triggering our curiosity. I mean, this is really the kind of the core discipline of the podcast is listening for something that triggers a question which allows us to have a conversation that goes deeper,
Mm.
even if this is the first time we've ever talked. So
Well, thank you for sharing that.
what what was it? Do you remember when this thing called listening first touched you in such a way that it became this kind of core value of your life? What was then in the initiating experience that brought that to you?
Yeah, it's a lovely question and one that I was asked only the other day, funnily enough. And there is a moment in my life that was transformational for me in discerning a specific type of listening that generates the finest independent thinking in another. And there's another moment in my life which, as I now look back on, made an impact in a way that I hadn't realized because I was just a kid. I think the most transformatory piece was about 15 years ago. One of my colleagues, who was also a coach working in this human capital management consultancy I worked with, came up to me and said, "Hey, look, Jane, I've just discovered and have been learning this new way of being called a thinking environment. And I offer these sessions, a thinking sessions as a coaching session. Would you like to have one?" And I said, "Sure, love to." And Ed, in that 45 minutes, I accomplished more than I had in any other coaching session. I felt more appreciated and valued, more creative and courageous. And I stepped away and I thought, wow, what just happened, Ray? What did you just do? What did we just accomplish? I was so fascinated that I went to, and he shared with me, it was the thinking environment. And I went to look more in this, and it's Nancy Klein's work. So I read both her books at the time and then began to study with her. And when I discovered the impact of this level of listening, which generates thinking, the finest thinking in others, it transformed my life as a
That's very interesting because I think that listening um, opens up pathways of consciousness, we can put it that way, or awareness that the person who is listening may not even understand that need to be brought out in the open, and they see things in themselves, and then by the sheer fact that someone is listening when we're talking, it may also open up those pathways of understanding that. So it sounds like that's exactly what you had experienced. That's great. That's fantastic. Is there a
indeed.
technique to this? Is there a technique to this?
Well, for me, it's a way of being.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is when we decide to listen. I love what you said earlier, Ed, about it being a discipline. I sometimes refer to this level of listening as a radical discipline. Radical in the very things that you said, a resistance for our ego to take over, or resisting the urge, I should say, resisting the urge to interrupt, resisting the urge to make a judgment, share an idea, give an opinion, worse still, try to fix somebody. It kind of is natural for us as human beings. It is what it is to be human, to want to solve problems. And so when we're listening to another, the greatest thing we can do is create the environment for them to solve their own problems, in my experience. Having said that, there'll be times when individuals will want information from us. They'll want insights and wisdom to help them resolve their own problems or take up an opportunity. But I think the foundation starts with listening. The fundamental piece is if we are willing to listen. And for sure, there are certain skills that we can learn and master. And in fact, it's fascinating for me, the research that was conducted by Audler and another of his colleagues, and was saying that when we're at work, we'll spend up to 45% of our time listening. And if we're in a senior leadership position, that time goes up to 80%. And the contributors to this research openly and honestly put their hand up to say, I've rarely, if ever, had any training in listening. Only 2% of the leaders for this report had said they'd invested in listening skills. And I think that's what we see everywhere. There's skills and training development for public speaking, how to perform well, how to write well. But where do we ever see listening skills, unless people know me or come on one of my courses? It's not something that people necessarily would consider. Although, to your point earlier in our conversation before we even came on air, that's becoming increasingly so. And I'm now being asked specifically by organizations to run webinars, courses in online, in person workshops on generative listening, which is fabulous.
I found I've been a leadership guy for 40 years, and 20 years of that I was a consultant, and my work with organizational leaders, whether they're CEOs or owners or general managers, whatever they are. What I discovered was that they were very much in an isolated position as the leader of the organization, and they didn't know what to do with that, and they didn't, and they thought of themselves as having to project strength and leadership, and in the classic sense of that. And what I came to realize, because I was getting to know their people at the same time, was that the CEO's real responsibility is the facilitation of the learning of all their people to be leaders. And that a real skill in that is the ability of that CEO to connect with their people. And you do that by listening. And I'll just give you one quick illustration of this. So I worked with this one company. The CEO was new. He followed an executive team that had been highly controlling, and he comes in and he spends the first 4 months just getting to know people. And he would, he'd get together with lunch with the blue collar level of the company. I mean, he would do things like that, and then I was brought in to help write a value statement. But by the time that happened, which took about 3 months, so 7 months into his tenure, he had earned the respect of the people, and they all could talk to him, refer to him, and speak to him by his first name. And it was all because he took the time to get to know them, which really is a process of listening.
That's a beautiful story, Ed. And I wonder, what do you think was the impact of him employing his listening at that very early stage of moving into the organization?
There was two very tangible impacts. One was he put the company in a position where it could be purchased, and the shareholders could do very well by the purchase. But even more importantly, within 2 years of his arrival, the company was selected by Forbes magazine as one of the 100 most trustworthy companies in the nation.
That's a wonderful story and the impact. So, what is it, do you think, that holds other leaders in businesses decide to listen as well as this gentleman and as much as he did? What is it, do you think, that gets in the way of some leaders developing this skill and applying it?
Well, I think it's simply they have to come to a point of recognition that they're not God and they don't know everything, and they are not in really the kind of level of control that they think they are, and but even more so, and I think it goes back to something you said earlier. I think they decide that they love the company and that their leadership has to be different if for that love to be fulfilled.
That's beautiful. It reminds me of other leaders I have the privilege of working with. And at the beginning, when we begin our work together, some of the challenges they bring and the reasons they've hired me is to help them increase their levels of engagement with their team members, with their other key stakeholders. And the assumptions, the limiting assumptions that are very commonly revealed is that as a leader, I need to know everything. And my team come to me because I know. And I think that's what puts them in this false illusion that I'm lonely because it all rests with me. And in my work, through my listening, is helping people reveal the assumptions that hold them back from being the leader they want to be. And this is one of the most common ones. And so when we bust that assumption, do you think it's true that you need to know everything as a leader? And they suddenly realize, well, no. And actually, I might be the CEO, but the ladies and gentlemen who are on the line or who are closer to the customer know far more than I do about an improvement in our product. So actually, if I were to go to them and ask them what they think could increase our customer engagement, actually, not only will they feel valued because they're giving their insights and experience to the chief exec, the chief exec can then begin, or the senior leader, that whichever I'm working with, takes into account the thoughts, ideas, and expressed feelings of their team members, and together come up with something that is enhances the proposition for the client, refine the product, and actually in that way that both the people have grown through listening because they've learned something new, they felt valued, and the business grows because their product or service is enhanced. So for me, this reflects, listening is one of the key tenets of human-centered leadership, and it's something that really generates both human value and economic value. As Bob Chapman would say, one of the finest mentors, I think, and leaders of our world today who really amplifies human-centered leadership, and empathetic listening be a key tenet of that, in how he describes the whole purpose of business as being a force for good in the world, and how it can generate both human value and economic value in harmony rather than at a cost to one another. What are your thoughts?
Oh, well, of course, I agree with you. Um, I think that we're in a transition where these old ways that we've described no longer work, and people are recognizing they don't work. And so they're looking for new answers. And I think the work that you do is an answer to a lot of those needs. And I think you're well positioned for that. Um, so you know, I think about all these leaders that I know who have been in their positions for, say 5, 10 years, and how difficult it is after the honeymoon period is over. And that, I mean, I'm thinking about one person in particular who's moving into a new position, and um, I'm trying to figure out how do I help him. And I think he has to ask me for help before I can really help him. Yeah. I have a neighbor who took on the care of a woman in our neighborhood who's a drug addict, alcoholic and drug addict. And and he's got a great heart, and he wants to help her. And she just keeps using him because she's not ready to change. So I think helping people get ready to change and to become different, and then in so doing, they become listeners, they become curious. I think that's this transition point that we're at. And I think there's no uh, clear, definitive, certain pathway through this. It all is comes back to how we relate to each other. So, and I think what you and Anthony and uh, what's our friend in Hamburg, um,
Eula.
right, Julia. I think what you all are doing is really important in this regard, and uh, and its long-term effect is going to be great, and because one by one you're going to be picking people off and talking about this human-centered leadership, and and I'm not sure people understand what that is. So could you describe what that is for us? Because maybe this is an introduction to some people who have never thought about human-centered leadership, and maybe we can put them in touch with you and Anthony and Julia, and see what would happen. Who knows? I would love that. I mean, that would be the fulfillment of this whole enterprise of podcasting, to see something like that. So let's talk about human-centered leadership, and what's your perspective on that?
Well, thank you. Well, for me, human-centered leadership is seeing the goodness in others and generating an environment for them to be the very best of themselves. And so, what does that mean in business terms? And essentially, it means that I believe as a leader, our role is to enable others to step up to and into who they're meant to be so they can perform at their best and make their best contribution. Because I think that's who we are in essence as a human being. We want to make a contribution. We want to find and nurture our gifts and talents, demonstrate them, continue to grow as a human being, be appreciated for them. And this is what a human-centered leadership approach will do. And so if we look at what that means in terms of behavior terms, it means helping others have a clear purpose, it's like a purpose-driven work. So organizations, there's a lot about a purpose-driven organization, but in tactical terms or practical terms, it means, having a clear purpose and letting your team members know their role in that purpose. So they can see why they come to work each and every day and how it sits in alignment with the purpose of the organization. I think it also means this sense of engaging team members in a way where they feel valued. So they know that both who they are and what they do matters. We do that through your beautiful story you shared earlier today, the gentleman who took over a new role as a CEO and spent 4 months listening to the people, the team members, understanding who they are, what mattered to them, who they were outside of work as well as inside of work. Because when we come to work, we come as a human being, not as a function. And I think when we start to treat people as humans rather than functions, i.e., the accountant or the receptionist or the coach, we suddenly see more. And so the way we can value people is to listen to them. And when we listen to generate their finest thinking, they become creative and courageous and resourceful. And they begin to add value to themselves. And because they add value to themselves and their team, they go home and adding value to their families and then add value to their organization. And then the final piece for me is about having a mindset of service, this servant leader approach. I'm here to serve others, to serve my team members, my stakeholders, my customers. And I think when we have that sort of culture of service, that demonstrates this human-centered leadership and helps us generate business for good, as a force for good. And I think also it's this idea of generating human-centered value. So growing and developing our people in a way that then generates value for our business. And adding on to all of that, the work that we've been doing with Anthony is looking at some of the virtues. What if we went right back to our human nature, truth, beauty, and goodness? And if we began to develop our virtues of wisdom and courage, these are the sorts of things that will enable us to be the best version of ourselves. And the last thing I'll say on human-centered leadership, Ed, is that what I've shared with you is not rocket science. It's not new. It's a way of being and behaving that our predecessors, our philosophers were many, many, many hundreds of years ago. And I think we just have forgotten what we know. And we have been so caught up in a world that's full of rush and urgency, persuasion, and wanting us to be somebody other than who we are. And so therefore, what my offer is to say that this isn't difficult. Well, it's not difficult. It's only hard because it's radical, but it's stuff that we already know how to be and do.
So, what is it that someone who would be listening, watching our conversation today, what is it that they need to be thinking about that leads them down some short little path to the recognition, oh, I need to be different than I have been? What do you see as that kind of path of discovery that they need to go through?
Well, a couple of things. I think in Anthony's book, Humanize, there is a beautiful way of looking at personalist leadership and understanding our purpose, why we do what we do. So for a leader to recognize the path for he or she to go on is, first of all, ask yourself, what is my purpose? Why am I in business? Or why am I doing the role that I'm doing in service of this business? The second question to ask oneself is, who am I doing this with? What are the key relationships that I need to invest in or develop further? And thirdly, what are my core values? What do I stand for? And this is important to think about the behaviors and how I show up in the world that will engage other people, will let other people know that they matter. A key tenet of that is our capacity to listen and appreciate another, appreciate the goodness that we see in each other. So these are the first three: is understanding our purpose, understanding who we are in business with, understanding the values. What are our core values? And finally, the fourth piece is our responsibilities. What are we as a leader uniquely responsible for? And what are our team members responsible for? And to be clear on that, this kind of helps us understand the culture of service, if you like. But when we know what we are responsible for, we can then be accountable for that. And it mitigates any confusion or inefficiencies by being clear on what we're responsible for as well as our team members. So these are the four steps I would invite someone to reflect on. Have I missed anything, Ed?
No, I don't think you missed anything at all. Maybe how does this apply to the situation I'm in? So that's not simply kind of an abstract set of questions, but okay, this is the situation I'm in. How do these things help me to be better at this, be more human? But the other question that I have, and this is kind of a persistent question for me, and it's how do we help people who are, say, younger than 30, people in their 20s and people in their teens begin to learn these things because I don't think they're getting it from their schools. I'm not even sure they're getting it from their families. And so these kinds of principles, which I think are not just about human leadership, but also about human life, about human flourishing, these are really important. And if we can help young people to learn them or to begin to explore them, I think then a lot of the problems that we face in the world will get resolved pretty quickly because I think what I see with young people is once they learn something, boy, they're on it. What do you think about that?
Well, firstly, I'd love to say that I'm thrilled to see that some of these skills are now being embedded in some schools. And I know Bob Chapman and the Chapman Foundation are doing some phenomenal work in your country, in the States, at Harvard and other universities, bringing it and business schools, bringing in specific electives on empathetic listening, culture of service, recognition and celebration, human-centered leadership. And I've seen some of the work that has come out from these classes, some of the essays the students have written, and it's been phenomenal. So I'm really thrilled to see through my communications with Bob the impact he's having and how some of these business schools are taking on this wonderful work. I too, here more locally in the UK, have been invited by a number of business schools to join colleagues of mine who are running courses such as ethical decision making. So Andrew Bourne, who's also part of our human-centered leadership group, he, in fact, just today, have confirmed up another session. I'm joining him in running a session on generative listening. So the students from the MBAs and the master's programs, and he very generously shared with me some of the output from their course, where they have been invited to write about the electives and the impact they've had. And it was just been amazing to see what they've written, the impact of my session with them on listening, how it's had for them not only as a student in their work, but also in their relationships outside of work. So whenever I'm invited into a school, I follow up and have the opportunity to provide an environment for students to learn about these skills. And then I think the third way is for us more generally is to role model it and to do what you're doing. I mean, having such a podcast, inviting me to share some ideas and thoughts, and hopefully there'll be some people, some young listeners in to get curious around, wow, I see this is a key tenet now for effective leadership. So where might I learn, where might I go to read about the impact of listening, for caring for our team members, our stakeholders? And so I think we can role model it as well in with our young people and encourage them to be curious around how they might embody some of these skills for themselves, because I know it will make a difference to their relationships at the schools, in their families, and the work that they do as well.
Okay, here's my last question, and I love asking this question because some people are just really, really into it, and the other people are, oh, I haven't thought about that. But um, what is your sense of hope for the future?
It's big. I have a huge sense of hope for our future. I think our young people are our future. I am very blessed to be mum of two university going children, girls, and they'll be completing their university degrees this year. And we've just had the most beautiful holiday together over the Christmas period, and I never cease to be amazed by how they show up in the world. In fact, they are my biggest inspirers, from what they share with me, how they're learning and growing. I have huge hope for our future. I think we are seeing a shift towards a more caring society for the elders in our life through the business opportunities. I see technology advancing in a way that is going to enable us to be efficient and effective. We need to be responsible in how we use that technology. And I think it continues to grow at a pace faster than we change and evolve as human beings. But I think one of the biggest causes of hope for me is in the work that I do in generating environments for people to think independently, to think with courage, with imagination, with creativity. And every single time I have the opportunity to coach or teach or facilitate these environments, I just see the resourcefulness, the creativity, the hope in others, and that fuels me with hope, Ed. So we've got lots to look forward to. We can already see some shifts positively changing in our world. The peace agreement that's coming out of Gaza, the Palestine, and Israel right now, we're making positive change, positive moves. And so I'm very hopeful. What about you?
I
Where are
share.
you? What's
I,
your sense of hope? Yeah, in fact, let me ask you this. What is a source that provides you with dependable hope?
um, apart from my faith, it is my relationships with people where I see um, people's growing willingness to consider change and that they are becoming more aware of they're becoming more understanding about their experience of life. And instead of kind of operating off of these kind of hard principles that are just simply kind of analytical statements, constructs, they're beginning to see that there's more to life than following, I'd say, following the rules. Because I think they felt that I know a lot of people who are rule followers, and the rules are not working for them. And so there is this openness, and I wouldn't have said this 2, 3 years ago, but there's this openness now that, and it's not an openness to a specific thing, it's an openness to what is going to occur, which gives me hope. And I've just in the last year I've moved back to my hometown, and it's been a strange experience. It's a good experience. It's been very strange because in some ways it's the same place I left when I was 18, vowing never to come back because I was going to, travel the world. I was going to be adventuresome and that's exactly what I've been able to do. But now that I'm back, I see how all of that experience now gives me a way of understanding all these people that I once knew 50 years ago, but now all these other people that I'm now meeting and seeing how those those kind of compartmentalized social contexts that exist in every community are somewhat breaking down, and maybe I have a place in some of these. So it's watching relationships grow and develop and helping people realize that they have something to contribute. And when they say I have something to contribute, then all of a sudden their sense of responsibility changes, their sense of commitment changes, their sense of self-worth changes, their sense of tolerance for shallowness or laziness or something else begins to change. And I think I have this language that I use, and I saw this in some of the companies that I worked with, and particularly ones where there was problems at the executive level. And what I saw was there was this persistent residual culture of values that persisted because it resided in the relationships of the people. And I'm seeing where this is exactly human-centered leadership. I'm seeing where we emphasize relationships and the values that join those relationships together. When those things begin to happen, when that formulates and forms into something real, then things really begin to happen in ways that are really lovely to see.
I so appreciate, Ed, your giving nature for the people who are lucky enough to come across your bow. So I have a question for you. I know we haven't got too long left, but given you've returned back to where you began life in your hometown, you said, what is it that you would love to do in the remainder of your precious life?
Well, I'm 71 years old, and when I turned 70, I made the commitment that I was starting the third half of my life. So I'm going to live another 30, 35 years. Um, so I'm going to work until I can no longer work any longer. And what I hope to see is my goal is to see 1% of the world's population take personal initiative to create impact in their local communities. That's my goal. And the podcast is going to be the vehicle for sharing that idea around the world. And that was never something that I had in mind. And it's only emerged as I've done this. And so it's brought me into relationships like you and Anthony and Jewel and so many other people, where just by saying this, it plants that seed in their mind of thinking about other people that they know who just need some encouragement to go out and contribute. And when they start contributing, things begin to change. So I'm planning to spend the rest of my life podcasting. I'm looking forward. You will be episode 202, and I'm looking forward to the day that I have the 1000th episode. So I've got, it's about 100 episodes a year. So I've got another 8 years to go to get there. And I hope I have the stamina and the strength. But if I have if I have 100 and let's say 180 people, 185, 90 people so far that I've interviewed, think of what that looks like when there's 1,000 episodes and there's close to 1,000 people that I've interviewed. And all of them in the same way that you and I have talked. So I think what you're doing with the listening and the human-centered leadership and the training and the encouragement that you bring to the world, I think it's really important. And I don't know if you get enough recognition for that. I don't think you look for recognition, but at least you need the appreciation. And I want you to know how much I appreciate that.
Well, thank you, Ed. And I'm so grateful to have the opportunity to share my message. And as you said, hopefully sow a few seeds for others to discern that listening could be a massive game changer for them in their life, whether they're a leader or aspiring leader, a parent, a mentor, a coach, anyone who wants to support others be the best version of themselves through their capacity to listen with intention, and listen to release the potential that's right there.
Well, we'll put in the show notes how people can find you, okay? Because I'd love for them to do that because you just have a very wonderful way, and it's well, it's just a wonderful way of being, and it's 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 uh it's part of your talent, and I appreciate that. So
Well,
thank you,
thank you, Ed.
thank you for being here, and thank you all for watching. I hope you have heard something that sparks in you a sense that I need to make some changes, or I have something I need to go work on because I've not developed this part of me. Something like that. And today is a good day to start. So thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time here on the Eddie Network podcast. Bye bye.